At T-Mobile, our critical mission is providing unparalleled 5G coverage for when connectivity is mission critical. Introducing T-Priority, America's best 5G network experience for first responders, even in times of congestion. More capacity, faster speeds, better coverage. T-Priority from T-Mobile, built for tomorrow's emergencies, ready today. Discover more at t-priority.com.
For qualifying organizations on eligible rate plans, coverage not available in some areas and may be impacted by emergencies.
What's up, you guys? Welcome back to the Mixed Doubles Podcast. We're your hosts, Maggie Robinson
and Josh Smythe-Macaulay.
We're former D1 athletes and colleagues at the NFL and NBA with a passion for all things women's sports. If you're interested in more content, please follow us on Instagram at Mixed Doubles Pod. That is 1D, the mix and the double, share it. And if you like what you're hearing, please rate the show, throw us a little 5 stars, and give us a follow. It actually goes a really long way in boosting our show on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So we really appreciate it. Josh, take it away.
All opinions stated here are our own and have no affiliation with our employers whatsoever.
Always got to say it. Okay. So welcome back to our interview series. Today, in honor of Women's History Month, we have a fantastic guest. Today, we have with us Cathy Yancy. Cathy is the Vice President of Broadcasting at the NFL, focusing on broadcast rights, policies, and compliance. An Arizona native, she went to ASU and began her career in Phoenix at Channels 10 and 3 TV as a news and sports reporter. She then moved to ESPN to work as the first full-time female producer of SportsCenter. After spending several years as a producer, Cathy pivoted to the business side of sports media as a director of programming and acquisitions at ESPN. In 2002, she joined the NFL and has been here ever since. Cathy has truly paved the way for women in sports, and I feel so lucky to work alongside her and learn from her at the league. Cathy, thank you so much for coming on the pod.
Oh, thank you for having me. Thanks. That was a very nice intro. I heard in your last podcast that you stalk people before you interview them.
I did try to do my research. I did.
Yeah, I mean, I started looking around. I started looking over my shoulder when I heard that. Are there cars sitting outside my house, people looking in the window? But yeah, you had I didn't give you any of that information, so good for you.
Did some digging. Found an article from 1993 and I was reading up. I was there.
Was it the one that when I was at ESPN?
It was the Herald? Yes, it was when you were at ESPN.
Herald, was it this?
Oh my gosh,
she has it framed.
And it's you and 2 other people who were interviewed.
Ooh, is it this?
Yes, proving it's not a man's world.
Hartford Current, yeah.
That's what it was.
That's Bob Lee. That's Bob Lee at the front there.
Oh my gosh. It's funny because I mentioned this to you earlier, but I'm reading the ESPN kind of like biography, if you will.
Yeah.
All those guys have all the fun, and it's so funny to hear all these names and then just like actually conceptualize them as real people when I meet people who worked at ESPN.
Yes, yeah, that's great. Good for you.
Yeah,
we do our due diligence, I'll say.
You do. Before we start, I know you want to ask me some questions, which is great. Can I ask you some questions? I haven't heard anybody ask you that. I'm really impressed. I've listened to a lot of the podcasts, and I'm super impressed with what you guys are doing. I've learned so much. I've worked in sports my entire career, and I have learned so much listening to this. But where did you get the idea?
Matt, do you want to talk or should I talk about it?
I can start it off. So
Yeah.
Josh and I, Cathy, as you well know, sat run in front of each other at the NFL. And so we would always just chat and just kind of yammer. And we were both kind of early on. So at the beginning, responsibilities weren't super high. So we would just chit chat all the time. Found out that we each had podcasts previously in college. Mine was on women's sports, and then Josh's was kind of an interview-based podcast. And learned that Josh is a huge WNBA fan. And I think from there, we kind of just tossed around the idea of, oh, this would be fun, maybe. And then actually, at the end of March of last year, we kicked it off. So we're almost at our 1-year podiversary.
When is it? Is it March 24th? Is that it?
Yep, March 24th.
Podiversary.
That's great. And how did you choose women's sports specifically? Because Maggie, you played, and Josh, you're a fan of WNBA?
Yeah, I think I played football in college, so I think there was like a couple things that went into it. But one, obviously, we were talking so much about sports, and then we were working at the NFL, so it was, we both have this genuine passion for sports in general. But then diving deeper, we were both really interested in women's sports, and I think like it was around March, so it was definitely around March Madness and all of that seeding was happening. And one of my really good friends from college was playing basketball for USC, and obviously the Juju Mania and all of that was going on. So I was talking a ton about that. And I think for both of us, it kind of just clicked like, well, if we were going to do a podcast, I think it'd make a lot of sense to really dive in on women's sports because it's definitely an area within sports that's not talked about as much, obviously has grown exponentially over the last year, but just a great opportunity for us to kind of bring both of our perspectives into it. And I think that was like the idea of the podcast and why it's called Mixed Doubles is you get Maggie's perspective as a woman and my perspective as a man, but then both of us kind of having the combined perspectives of being athletes and working in sports. So that's, I guess, where it came from. Really, like Maggie said, just chatting at work.
Yeah, so you answered my next question, which was about the name, which is very clever. I mean, I sort of figured it out. I've watched tennis, but that's just really smart. And I'm so impressed with how you guys prepare that you can spend that much time. I don't even know how long most of them are, what, 30, 40 minutes or something like that, and just rattle off one right after the other, talking about all these sports. And some of them, there are a few occasions, I will admit, you throw an acronym out there for a sports league, and I'm out walking the dog, and I have to go home and look it up. Wait, what was that? I didn't even know about that league, and I read all the trades too.
Yeah.
So I'm very impressed. You guys are doing a great job, and it's also so smart. You're entrepreneurs, and it's so smart early in your career to do something like this. I'm sure you've learned a lot.
Thank you.
No,
It's been
thank
really
you so much.
fun. I think we also like enjoy the prep work because that's all the learning and just like keeping up to date with it is enjoyable for both of us. So I think that makes it doesn't feel like tedious or like a task. It's like, oh, cool, I get to go like troll all these sports pages and see what's happening and then watch some videos and then chat about it with my friend is what it feels like.
It's clear that you're having fun. There's no question about it. And that energy comes through. And I think that's what I really appreciate. It's not 60 minutes. It's not, no, this is not an investigative story or podcast. And I think you guys do a really good job and you make everything sound fun. There are, I haven't been to an MSL game. MSL, oh my gosh.
Well,
See, I'm already getting my acronyms. I know what MLS is for sure.
And
Um,
WSL?
for MLS.
That's correct. Yes, and I haven't been to either. I've
Mhm.
been to WNBA games. I actually went to the first ever game. I negotiated that deal with the NBA. Yeah, with Val
We can
Ackerman.
talk about that too.
We have to hit that later.
Yeah. So that I've done, but yeah, I've not been to a women's soccer game. No, never. I haven't been to a women's hockey game.
We haven't hit that
I
We need to
have
either.
hit that now.
I have been to a women's girls baseball game. One of my daughters played
Oh my
baseball
gosh.
in the women's league. Yeah, and I noticed that I didn't hear women's baseball or girls baseball come up. So that's a topic you guys need to cover.
That's a good call
But I'll
out.
be honest, like I'm completely ignorant. This is the first time that I've heard women's baseball as a
Yeah,
thing because I typically thought, right, like softball is the one that gets all the attention.
it does. Yeah,
So there is
yeah,
women's baseball. All right, we'll dive. We have to dive into that.
Noted.
I think
yeah,
two things I noted: dive into women's baseball, and then two, we need to explain our acronyms
Yeah.
without somebody.
yeah. And I need to get mine right.
Oh no, that's great. Seriously, Kathy, thank you so much. Like it's fun. This is definitely the first time we've been interviewed off the bat. So it's cool to talk about the passion and just getting to do this podcast. But we'll kind of turn it back to you and get the interview started. But as Maggie explained, and also Maggie, the fact that like you rip off these, and I know it's scripted, but I'm still super impressed all the time because it's ridiculous and it's a lot. So thank you. But for you, Kathy, I know you've spent, gosh, your entire career in sports television and you've built this incredible reputation for yourself. I mean, like even for me, when I joined the NFL, like heard your name and obviously got the pleasure of working in media and broadcast, I guess was the umbrella. So getting to kind of see the work that you do and everybody else was really cool. But can you just talk to us about like the precipice of your career? Joining ESPN and then kind of that progression to the NFL and how your career has evolved.
Yeah, sure. It's probably a longer story than you guys have time for, so I'll try to do the abbreviated version. I knew when I was really young, I wanted to work in sports or some aspect of television. I also liked music. That was another passion. And interestingly enough, over the course of my career, I've been able to accomplish all of those in some very unique ways. But while I was at Arizona State, they have a TV station there. Megan, you and I talked about this. They have a
Mhm.
PBS station there. So my freshman year, right away, I went and signed up and did a work study. Got started on a news magazine. It wasn't long before I got a call from the local CBS affiliate asking to come and work there, but it would be news. I said, I'll come and work if you have part-time, because I'm still going to school, if you have anything in sports. And they said they didn't have anything but on-air jobs. They didn't have any producers. There was no station in the Phoenix market that had a sports producer at that time. So I just thought, well, at least this is a way to open a door. So I went to the station, worked on news, but launched this late night show. And in this late night show, it was a late night news show. I had proposed, somewhat selfishly, that we do a sports segment, which we did. So I got to write that. It got very good reviews in the local papers, but it was also being read by a man. There was an anchor. So people were telling me at that time I should try to move into on air, that would be my best shot. There was a woman working at the station at that time who was so incredibly knowledgeable about sports. She was the first female sports anchor in the Phoenix market. It was a tough road. It was really tough. I don't think people were fully ready for women then. And I watched her, and yet I could work behind the scenes and produce sports segments, and I didn't get the wrath of the press. Somewhere along there, they created an opening for a sports producer, and I left news. I was at that time actually even producing part-time the 6 o'clock news. And it was a really great experience. Starting in news is really good. It's good if you're going to go on and work really in sports or anywhere else. But I then moved over to sports, loved it. And I was at the station, then switched stations, went from the CBS station over to the ABC station, got a promotion, became the executive producer. I oversaw and produced Cardinals shows, the coaches show,
Wow.
created a players show. We had the Arizona State deal, so I got to travel on the team plane and do the Arizona State shows. And I did both studio shows and pregame, postgame, as well as worked on the live games that we had. Covered all the local sports there, which at that time was not a lot, but the Suns, covered the Suns. I was a regular there. And yes, Josh, I heard early on you either know or you worked with Magic Johnson, right?
I
Yeah.
did. Yeah, I did.
Yeah, I got to know him a little bit, of course, because the Suns Lakers rivalry, and he was great, and that was fun.
Cathy did her research too.
She did.
Yeah, and so um, while I was there, ESPN started stalking me and asking me to come and work in Bristol. They had seen some of my work, and I kept putting it off. I kept putting it off. It was, I had kept coming up with excuses why I didn't want to go just yet. And then I was getting closer to making a decision. I thought, okay, it's time to leave Phoenix. I always kind of thought I'd move east anyway. And for whatever reason, I decided, well, maybe I'll give this on-air thing a shot. So I put together some tapes and I sent them out, and I got a job offer pretty quickly at a small station, a CBS station in Wheeling, West Virginia. I have family in the area, so that was nice and convenient, but it wasn't for sports. It was to do weather and news and report during the week and be the backup sports person. So once again, I thought, okay, take a shot. Went to Wheeling and spent a little over a year there on air. It was a very, very interesting experience. I learned a lot. I learned a little bit about weather. I knew nothing about weather before. I grew up in Phoenix. It's sunny and hot every
Right.
day. Now here I am in Wheeling, West Virginia, and they actually have seasons and they have weather. And so I had to learn a little bit about that. And the people who were calling in and, giving reviews and making comments were not always very kind. Often they would say she doesn't know anything about weather. And somewhere in there, I think we're probably there about it's probably 6 months or so. And our first child, my daughter Brooke, oldest daughter Brooke, I was pregnant with her. And every time I turned sideways on the weather map, it would cover up a little bit more of the country. And it got to a point where one woman wrote in, and they put this up on the bulletin board, that they wanted to see me off the air because every time I turned sideways, I covered up the state of Texas. And she has an aunt there and she needs to see the weather. I was like, that's it. I'm done. I'm so done. This is ridiculous.
Oh.
But then shortly after that, the sports guy was going to take some extended time off, and they let me do sports. And when I did sports, the reviews came in. This is great. She's awesome. Take her off weather, let her do sports. She knows what she's talking about. She's really good. But by then I was just completely done. Like I just did not want to do this anymore. I didn't like the critique, having the hair and makeup and everything else that went with it. I just wanted to do the work. So I called ESPN and said, I think I'm ready. And soon after they had a job, actually, they had a job offer. They were about to launch ESPN2, and they wanted me to come and work on that. At that point, I was like 8.5 months pregnant. And they convinced me to fly there, 8.5
Wow.
months pregnant. It was my first child. What did I know? I got on an airplane, went, they offered me the job. And then I started a few months later producing SportsCenter. And that was awesome. It was such a great experience. I loved it. People there were so welcoming. So many people that I worked with then, other producers, they're still at ESPN, many of them, so have, long lasting relationships. That was awesome. I was at ESPN. I was there a year, 2 years when I saw a posting for a job in programming acquisitions. And I was thinking about moving over to the business side. And it just looked super interesting, acquiring shows, acquiring programming for the network and deciding, where it gets scheduled and all. So I decided to go over and talk to them for an informational interview. I just wanted to understand what it was about. And they offered me the job on the spot,
Wow.
Like,
which was kind of
perfect.
crazy. Yeah, yeah. So I felt bad. I had to go back to the production department and tell John Walsh and Steve Anderson, who were running it then, and they were so good to me. I had to tell them the news, but they said, well, at least you're staying here. You're staying at ESPN. So I spent, I think, 8 years in programming, most of that working for John Wildhack, who Maggie. He's the
Yeah.
AD now at Syracuse. And it was phenomenal. When I arrived, I had this vision of I'm going to manage NFL and NBA and all the big sports. And they told me that's not how it works. You got to learn the business first. So they gave me water skiing and jet skiing and snowboarding and ice skating and all those to start because I had to learn how to negotiate and the business terms. And you guys have seen contracts, TV contracts, they're very complex. So I started doing that. I learned as I went, got to know, work with some really interesting people in the business. I mean, there are people who are very passionate about those sports. And so that was really great. And then I came up with an idea. I kept thinking, okay, how can I move this along a little bit faster? And I came up with an idea for water sports because it was spread all over the place. There was beach volleyball was on one night, water skiing was somewhere else. And I said, let's put it all together and let's put it on Thursday night and I create a water sports block. Get a sponsor, and then let's hire some supermodel to come and host it. Everyone thought I was joking. They gave me a budget and I started making phone calls. And the next thing you know, I was having lunch in New York City with Elle McPherson, the supermodel, and her agent, and they agreed to the deal. So I
Wow.
hired her, put all the water sports there. Oh, at the same time, I put all the ice skating on Monday night. So it was counter to football in the fall. And it worked. It worked. Revenue went up, ratings went up, viewership, all of that. And so my boss came to me and said, okay, fine, you can have the NFL. So I had the NFL about a year, a little over a year later. I got to manage that and then slowly took on some of the other sports to manage NBA. We did not have NBA games then, but we spent a lot of time with the NBA. And that's how I got involved with the WNBA. Worked with Val Ackerman on that to launch that league. I worked with the PGA Tour, slowly just took on a lot of the major league sports there. And I learned a lot about negotiating. I think you learn sometimes as much from the people around you and the people on the other side of the table when you're negotiating as you do. You're going to make mistakes along the way and you're going to learn as you go, what works and what doesn't. I learned so much from the other leagues, some really, really smart people out there. And then from there, NFL offered me a job and I came to the NFL.
What did
That's
you
that's
start out
amazing.
with at the NFL? Were you still in broadcasting? I couldn't nail that down.
The NFL was organized a little differently then. Programming was in the marketing department. Yeah, John Collins was running that, and I had worked with him on a lot of deals over the years. So he hired me to come and work on programming. And then the broadcasting department was a separate group.
Okay.
So when I first started, it was more leaning towards programming. My first year, we did the first kickoff game, the first kickoff show. We closed down Times Square and then started working on the launch of the NFL Network. And so I worked on putting together the programming grid and then presenting as we went through the sort of the strategic process. What does this network look like? I had a team of people that worked with me and we put together 3 different programming plans. One was an NFL network focused solely on NFL. The other was a football network, just football. And then the third was a men's network. At that time, Lifetime was really popular. Oxygen had just
Mhm.
launched, and there was no men's network at the time. So we pitched that as well, just so we had some things to think about. And obviously, as you know, it was NFL Network was what was launched. And then after that happened, it was close to time to start negotiating the next round of TV agreements. And so I was called in to help with that. And that was 2004, and that's where it all began. I started working on the TV agreements with the TV partners. Spent 2 years working on those and getting those launched in 2006. And I've been in the broadcasting group ever since.
Wow.
Did
This
you
is
end up working? I feel like you might have, but did you end up working kind of against people that you had worked with at ESPN on the program acquisition side when you were doing that?
Oh yeah, yeah. When yeah, one interesting story. We were working on the launch, preparing sort of the strategic plan for the NFL Network launch. There was one little hiccup. ESPN had exclusive rights to do shows. Aside from NFL films, just shows, daily shows, live shows, news shows that are NFL branded. So we got into a meeting, and Steve Bornstein, who had used to work at ESPN, he was the president of ESPN when I was there. Now he's at the NFL. He said, we've got to figure out a way out of this. We can't launch NFL Network until we get out of these rights. And I said, Steve, I don't think that's even possible. I negotiated that deal at ESPN. I'm the one you might remember. I got ESPN exclusive rights. We wanted to shut out all the other networks, and I don't think it's possible. And he looked at me and he said, well, if you're so brilliant that you could lock the NFL out in the first place, you can find a way to unwind that deal. And I thought, oh my God, this is impossible. And I kept insisting it was airtight, that that's how I negotiated it. And he said, well, you're just making the case that you can undo it. So by coincidence, if I was really stressed about that, I spent weeks and weeks trying to figure it out. And then a month or two later, I read in Sports Business Daily that ESPN was launching a new HD channel. So this would have been about 2002 or three. And back then, the HD channels were separate. They were just, it was a separate channel that you had to go to. And I went to Steve, and that day, I went running into his office and I said, I've got it, I've got it. ESPN just announced they're launching an HD channel. And he didn't understand, well, what's the big deal? And I said, they don't have the right to do that. They cannot do that. And they just announced it. They're going HD, and they're going to take all of their programming. And the story said, including NFL. We got them.
wow.
Like, I told you you could do it. So we went back to ESPN. We began a negotiation with them. We gave them the rights to launch an HD channel. They had to give us programming rights back. So that's how we got to launch the channel, and then it ended up I've been in broadcasting ever since. So since that day, there are actually people at ESPN in some pretty big positions that I hired along the way too. But yeah, yeah, it is interesting sitting across the table from many of those people. Yeah.
It's incredible. Just making a deal and then going back on it at another
It's
place. Yeah,
But it's about the relationships,
absolutely.
if you're ever in a position where you're going to be negotiating with people that you worked at the NFL, it's about the relationships, and that's so important.
Yeah, I was gonna say if I was ever negotiating with me here, I think that'd be really funny.
And you know what? You might. I tell this to people all the time. I tell this to my kids. You grow up in the business with these people. You're going to grow up with them, and they're going to help you. You're going to help them at, different points in your career. They may help you find a job. You might help them. You may help them find somebody to hire. You're going to work on deals with them. Maybe you might be on the other side of the table with them, but you're going to grow up in that business. And there are so many people in the business now that I can say that about, that are just, lifelong friends, and that I've known them for so long.
Yeah, I definitely think that's one of the things that Maggie and I talk about, and just I'm sure you've seen it too. All the people come up in the NFL and the group of friends that we have from the NFL, and now that I'm gone, I guess a month removed, it's still fun just keeping in touch with them. But I do want to selfishly ask, because you mentioned it in passing, but kind of the founding of the WNBA and the work that you did there with ESPN. You also mentioned Val Ackerman, who was the founding president of the WNBA. So
Yep.
can you just talk about kind of, I guess, quickly too, what that was like? Obviously, that WNBA has grown so much over the past year or two,
Yep.
but I don't know what it was like back then. What was it like kind of negotiating for those rights and building that league up?
Yeah. So I believe it was July of 1997 is when the league launched. And that's a long time ago. So you think about all those years and, God bless the NBA. They never gave up on the WNBA. They continued to grow and give it time and look at the success today. So they were looking at launching a women's league. Val was there and Adam Silver was there also. They were both executives high up in the organization. And it was a real priority for them. So we had a close relationship at ESPN with the NBA, even though we didn't have games during that period of time. And ESPN had games. By the time I arrived, they didn't have a games package anymore. And then shortly after I left, they got it. So when they came to us, we were negotiating at the time programming rights. So we had NBA shows. We would call it sort of like a surround initiative. It didn't matter what the sport was or what the event was, even if ESPN did not have rights to cover it, we were going to surround it with programming. And the leagues were very appreciative of that. So we had some pretty broad rights to do that. And so beyond the surround and the daily shows, we didn't have anything else. We didn't have any live games with the NBA. But they came to us and they asked us if we would work with them because they kind of assumed that we had I'm sure not sure that there was another network out there, honestly, that had the bandwidth or the space for it. So yeah, we jumped on it and it was mine to lead. I remember the first meeting that I had, it was the first big deal that I got to do outside of jet skiing and water sports and some of the figure skating deals. And I thought it would be helpful to have everyone in the room, all the people from across the organization. So I brought finance people and legal and production and everyone in for our introductory meeting. They all came in and they sat at this big conference table and they just looked at me like they were in shock. And I was so confused because I just thought this was normal. I thought this is how the company operated. Turns out that wasn't the case, that the other parts of the company weren't consulted until the deals were done. So at
Wow.
first I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I got this backwards, but I wanted their input. I wanted to make sure on the financial side, that we were good. I wanted marketing to come in there and kind of pitch, how could we market this? How could we make this larger than life? And yeah, there was a finance person who came to me several years later after this became sort of commonplace for doing deals. And of course, that's how we do them at the NFL. And they told me when they arrived in that conference room and they saw people from other departments, they thought they were all, she, she thought they were all there to get fired. It was the craziest thing. So that just kind of shows you how the business has evolved. And I stressed to them that this was a huge priority. This was not just because the NBA was asking us, but this was an opportunity to do something huge, groundbreaking with women's sports. We know there's an audience for women's sports out there. I had heard it from the sales team that there are advertisers that want to buy and advertise against women's sports. We didn't have to think long and hard about it. It felt like it was just such an obvious thing for us to do. So we got the deal done and the league launched and ESPN has had WNBA games ever since. So
Wow.
I negotiated directly with Val and so that was my first big deal. I don't think she knew that at the time. I think she knows it now. I've since told her. But because she was a lawyer and a big executive at NBA, so smart. If you haven't met her, I would encourage you to try to. She's really great about mentoring and getting together with others in the business. And I would strongly encourage that you get a chance. And I'm happy to put you in touch with her. I learned so much from her. She's fantastic. And really the credit for the WNBA really goes to Val. I mean, she's the one that had this idea and was determined to make it, come to life.
That is
Wow.
so incredible. I'm just
Yeah.
taking this all in. The fact that you were like a founding, the reason that the WNBA was broadcast on ESPN on a big sports network is such a crazy background story added on top of all the other amazing things you've done that just I didn't know this. I don't think people that we work like the younger people are aware of this. That's a huge moment. And for it to be your first deal.
Yeah, yeah. No, it was great.
Wow.
It was such an experience, and yet definitely a proud moment. Um, so I'm just amazed that it took so long for the league to get where it is now.
Yeah.
I really am. I know that, there are advertisers. I hear this a lot from the salespeople that I work with who try to pitch advertisers that are looking for women's sports programming. They're trying to pitch NFL. They know because there's a huge female fan base for the NFL,
Hmm.
but it's not the same. And they try this over and over, and it just doesn't work. So many of them want women's sports. And here we are, 2025, and I guess 2024 was probably the biggest year ever for women's sports. It took a lot longer than I expected, to be honest.
Yeah.
But
I would.
it's about the money. And I think there was a podcast I was listening to a while back that you guys were doing. It was at the LPGA, and
Mm.
why they don't make the same amount of money. And like even when some of the stories you told about WNBA and they didn't have private planes and such, it's the economics of television. You see this like college football games. College football drives so much revenue for the schools. There's not a women's sport that compares, that drives that kind of revenue. That's the challenge. It's very simple. More people watch, viewership goes up, advertising becomes more valuable, the ad rates go up, and then there's more money. The people are going to pay more. The networks are going to pay more money for the rights to those leagues and to those sports and those games.
Yeah, I think it's interesting too because there's so many, as you're talking about advertising, there's so many more advertisers or I guess brands that, at least from an NBA perspective, are unlocked from having the WNBA in our portfolio.
No question. No question.
Yeah, and even like now when we go out to different brands and they have the ability not only to partner with the NBA but to partner with the WNBA, it's like it's such a huge sell because there genuinely are so many other companies that are like traditionally we probably wouldn't even advertised in sports, but because we know we're over-indexing on, female viewership, by all means, this is a great opportunity. I think, excuse me, but you're starting to see a lot more of that. So yeah, it's
Maybe
definitely special.
I would argue even traditional brands, auto and beer and such. I mean, women have the buying power, right? So it just makes sense. If you look at women's sports should be able, I would say, to have greater breadth in terms of the advertisers, the number and the volume of advertisers than men's sports. They're absolutely making headway. Not there yet, but making a lot of progress. And it's really great to see.
Yeah.
In due time.
Speaking of progress, I would love to go back in your career a little bit. Some of the places you've worked, or just sports in general, have
Mhm.
had this long-standing kind of stereotype of being a boys' club. Is this ever something you faced or you witnessed? Are there any instances you'd be comfortable talking to?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it exists. There's no question. And I'd seen it over the years. I think that working in sports and like knowing sports, some people you've probably heard, say, listen, I'm just going to fake it till I make it. You
Mhm.
can't, it doesn't work everywhere, right? That whole thing makes me very uncomfortable, by the way. But you can't do that with sports. When I started working in sports, I knew sports. I was a big sports fan. I watched sports with my dad from the time that I was really young. Went to football games and baseball games and watched on TV. I participated in sports. So as I started working in it, spent a lot of time watching even more sports. It was important, especially when I was a producer going out and doing interviews with athletes and such. I had to do a lot of homework, no question. But when I worked in sports in the local market and when I went to ESPN, I really didn't see it on the production side. I never saw it. When I arrived in the Sports Center newsroom, all the guys there could not have been more welcoming. They could not. I mean, it was crazy. They welcomed me with open arms. They showed me how to do everything. I didn't never felt a sense of competition in any way. They offered to help in any way that they could. They were trying to give me like doctors. Do you need doctors? I remember one guy saying, hey, like you have a doctor, you have a dentist, you need an OBGYN. My wife has a great one. I'll help you out. I'm thinking, wow, like this is great. This is awesome. Like we really are just one big happy family here. It was a little different on the business side. When I went to the programming department, I didn't see it initially, but I think over time I saw a little bit more. the deal making that goes on. The guys would go out after work for drinks and they would talk about the deals and the strategy and programming and they would have their X games. I was there. I was actually in the room when Ron Semio came up with the idea for the X Games. We were at a brainstorming meeting, that was super cool. That's a great memory too for me. So they would go out for drinks, a couple times a week, and they would have these conversations. And that was not great, not ideal for the women. But fortunately, I had a great boss who I, was able to talk to about that. And I think, his perspective was, oh, well, you're certainly welcome, but you really want to go to a bar after work? Like you have a family to go home to, you have kids. And I was like, well, if it's going to be a work meeting, yeah, sure, I'll go. I'm not afraid to go and have drinks and such. So I think things changed a little bit over time. But when I first arrived at the NFL, there were not a lot of women. It's changed a lot over the years. But I mean, Maggie, you've seen it. We go to meetings with our network partners. There's not a lot of women, not a lot of women at the networks. Really
Yeah.
not, especially on the production side. Wonder if that's an area where there are a lot of young girls and women that just don't even know those jobs exist.
I truthfully didn't. I kind of feel like I fell into my role here at the NFL, and production is so interesting and it's so creative and so hands-on. I think there's so many people with that skill set who just aren't aware of it, or it's not being talked about in school as like an actual career pathway. But yeah, I agree. I had that same observation.
Yeah.
I'm obviously a young woman in sports, and I've thought about trying to balance at some point having a family, working these travel intense all hours of the day. Sports are on when everyone else is relaxing. That means we're working on
Yes.
holidays, like on weekends when everyone else is on the couch. Did you ever feel a certain pressure to prioritize family or prioritize work? And you obviously have this lovely family now. How did you kind of balance it all?
Listen, I think I've said this to people before, I think life comes with a series of trade-offs, right? That when you're in college and you can go out and party every night, but then you get a job, you can't really party every night, right? And you could prioritize, you're going to work out, you got to get up early, you're going to work out late. You're always making those sorts of choices. And so my two choices were clear. I wanted a career and I also wanted a family. I wanted kids. I wanted both. And I really, truly believe both were possible. Other things got sacrificed, hobbies. I work out, I was a workoutaholic from the time I was in college. I used to go to the gym and train on weights. That was probably one big sacrifice I had to make. I couldn't go to the gym after work. I needed to come home to my kids. And there were just some other hobbies and such that maybe I had to give up. I would play the piano, some sports, play tennis, and other sorts of things. Those are some of the trade-offs that you make. But I had an interesting experience that happened to me. I tell people all the time, women, one thing, and this goes for men too, take your kids to work. Take your kids to work. It's one of the simplest, it's probably the best tip I can give you, and it's so simple to do. When you leave for work, your kids just want to know, like, where are you going? It's a big black box for them. They don't know
Yeah.
what it looks like. They don't know who those people are. So I used to take my kids to work as often as I could. And fortunately at ESPN, it was a very welcoming environment. People were allowed to do that. I mean, it wasn't every day. It would just be, maybe once a month or so, they'd come to work with me. And they got to know what one of my kids dubbed my work friends. So they knew my other friends, right, from, our life at home. Now these are my work friends. But they also got to picture it. This is my office.
Hmm.
This is where my assistant sits. This is where we have meetings. And then I would take them on work trips as well, and they would get to meet people. So it was, I think for them, it was a much easier adjustment. But the big moment for me came one day when my oldest daughter came home and she asked me, could someday I get a job just like her best friend? And I I had to pause for a second because I'm thinking about her best friend and she said, she stays at home. She takes care of her kids. That's her job. Do you think someday that you could leave ESPN? My daughter was about 6 years old at the time.
Oh man.
And I had this like very temporary moment of brilliance. I mean, I was just sort of like, it's kind of like when you need to lift a car, they say you can lift a car. I needed brilliance in that moment, and it happened. And I said to her, hey, I need to tell you a secret. Kids love secrets, right? So I said,
Mhm.
listen, here's the secret. And I don't ever want you to tell any of your friends or anyone this because I don't want anyone's feelings to get hurt. I said, her mom has one job to take care of her kids. I have two jobs. I have two, she has one. Because think about it. Yeah, I go to ESPN and I travel and I do all this great work at ESPN. But I also am here for you. I cook and I clean and I do your laundry, and I'm there to work on the bulletin board on bulletin board day, which drove me crazy, but I did it anyway. I'm there for your concerts and your sports and your ballet and all of that. So I get to have two jobs, not just one. And my daughter looked at me and her jaw dropped and she just said, "Wow, that's amazing." And then I also went on to tell her, listen, I love my career. It's super important to me. I think I'm a better person and a better mom for it. And this is why I went to school. I spent a lot of years doing this because I always thought it was important too to inspire my kids to go off and have, really great careers and such too. And to really believe you can do it all. You can't do it all. You have to make choices, but to have the things that are most important to you. I didn't realize at that moment that she was actually listening to me until I came home one day. We went out to dinner that night, and my husband and I sat down to tell her I was leaving ESPN to go to the NFL.
Wow.
I got the first part of it out. I said, I'm leaving ESPN. And she started screaming in the middle of the restaurant. You what? You're doing what? You're leaving? What do you mean? How could you quit your job? You told me you have two jobs. You said you're happy that way, that you wouldn't be as happy if you didn't, that that's why you went to school. Why did you go to school in the first place? She just went off. This went on for about 2 minutes, yelling in the middle of the restaurant. We're just kind of looking at her, we just let it play out. And then she started crying and sobbing. And I said, are you done? Because I'm leaving ESPN, but I'm taking another job. And she asked where. And I said, I'm going to the NFL. And she stopped dead in her tracks, you know, between her, sort of sobbing. And she said, the NFL, really? And I said, yes, this is big. This is huge. This is really exciting. And then she said, well, will you still have the silver pass so we can go to Disney World? And they do a family party at the amusement park, every year, and I said, "I don't know about those, but they do have football games, I'm sure you can go, and they have this thing called Super Bowl." And she goes, "Oh, okay. Okay, I'm good now." And it was so funny because what I realized is that all that time I was telling her how important my job was, I don't think she was listening, but she
Mhm.
heard it. And so I used that on my kids. I shared it with other women and they've used it on their kids. It's not easy. There's some tricks to the trade. Find a good nanny and pay them
Yeah.
well, give them time off, give them vacation time. And just remember, you can't do everything. You have to make choices, but you can do both. I have four kids, two in college, two out of college, and they're very, very happy, very grounded. They're doing really well. And they would tell you that, that they're so happy that I continue to work and that I worked when they were young and that they didn't really miss out on anything because I made both work. I
Mhm.
made work work and I made homework.
And I think that's so impressive and something that, again, we talk about, but you're juggling so much. You were alluding to she had ballet practice. I'm sure your other kids also had extracurriculars. So it's like,
Oh,
and four
yes.
kids with different schedules. And then how are you shuttling them to practice? And then do you have a late work meeting? Oh, I have to negotiate these. It's just, it's never ending. So I have so
No.
much respect. And I'm sure that
Yeah.
growing up, they just, now we're probably so grateful and aware of the lengths that you went to support them in all ways. And I think that's just so special.
And I just think telling your kids, if you choose to have a career, and this is for men and women, it's important to talk to your kids and tell them why it's important. Tell them you love doing what you're doing. Don't be afraid to do that. This doesn't mean that you don't love them. It just means that you have this something else that makes you very happy. And I used to tell my kids, listen, I'm a better parent for this. I'm a better parent because I'm happy in doing what I'm doing.
That's incredibly special. Like you truly don't understand how much your parents do for you, how much your mom does for you until you get a little bit older and you're like, "Oh wow." Like,
Yeah, yeah.
she was really there for a lot.
I think sometimes it's, yeah, when you have kids of your own, you realize, holy cow, my parents worked when I was younger. My mother worked the entire time. And when I became a parent, I realized, oh my God, she used to come home from work, fix dinner, and then take us to all of our activities. That's insane. But yeah, it's just important to explain. I can't say that enough. You got to tell your kids why you're doing it and why it's important and listen to them and listen to their concerns. If they say, I need to see more of you, then, maybe there's a way to figure that out.
We're getting a master class right now, so I guess I don't know. I'm not going to put a timeline on having children, but when it happens, I will have this podcast to go back to and use.
Well, it is the most difficult thing you will ever do. It's also the greatest thing you will ever do. Yeah. Yeah.
Love that.
Yeah.
You did mention earlier your daughter being really excited about Super Bowl and that being
Mhm.
one of the things that had helped sell the pitch on moving to the NFL. So in our research, you've been to, gosh, like 30 Super Bowls now.
I have, yeah.
Can we just talk about, is it routine now? This Super Bowl is such a special event for everybody. I mean, Maggie, this was your first Super Bowl and you had an opportunity to see it from a perspective that most people don't. Cathy, you've done it several times, both ESPN and the NFL. I mean, does it get old? Like what? I don't know. What keeps it fresh for you? What is that experience like at this point?
It never gets old. Every Super Bowl I go to, it feels like the first Super Bowl I'm going to. It's extraordinary, and I'm very fortunate to have been to a lot of major sporting events. I've been to 3 Olympics, numerous NBA finals and All-Star games, MLB, World Series. I've been to World Cup. I've been to so many great, extraordinary events and so lucky to be there. To me, nothing compares to the Super Bowl. It's an experience like no other. The fact that it's just one event, one day, and one moment, it's not over multiple days. And the pregame show leading up, and you hear the anthem and you see the flyover, and it's just so special. I've never lost sight of that, never. And the halftime shows they're always so amazing. And it just feels so big. The other thing too is that it's interesting to me on Super Bowl Sunday, like during the game while I'm working, I will get texts from friends, like me old friends. It's the only time of the year that they text me. Reason is, and which is a little bit odd, like I'm working, but I love it. I love when I hear from them because they're watching the Super Bowl too, wherever they are. And it's such when we say this all the time, it's a shared experience, in the NFL and sports bring people together. It really does. And I always remember it in that moment. They're watching, they're with their friends and their family. They may not watch NFL games all the time, but they're watching the Super Bowl and they think of me and they text me, just to check in. And I just think that's super cool. But the Super Bowl it's amazing, absolutely amazing. It's
Do,
never gotten old.
do you have a favorite one? Is there, and to that point too, we saw as we were doing our research, there's a cool news clip when you guys were in Glendale a few years ago,
Yeah.
talked about kind of coming up. But do you have a favorite Super Bowl that you've been to?
It's probably, well, favorite Super Bowl that I've been to. That's a tough one. I guess if I had to pick one, it would be the one and only Super Bowl where I was actually on the field. So it was Super Bowl 40 in Detroit. It was the Steelers and the Seahawks. Steelers are my favorite team. And it just so happened that that year I was on the field. And Maggie, I think you were on the field this year, right?
Pre-half and post, so some
Yeah.
of it.
So coordinating some of that. So I was on the sideline. We would put 2 people on each sideline and just kind of monitoring and making sure that from a broadcasting perspective, everything was good. And so here I am on the field for the Super Bowl and my team's playing in it. Now, I don't advise anybody to do that because it is impossible to watch, and it's not a great viewing experience when you're on the sideline. But I couldn't cheer either. So that was kind of tough. Somebody that worked for the NFL then, he was our head of administration. He too was a Steelers fan, and he was also on the field. So we had kind of a secret hand signal where we would pass each other. We had like this little sign language thing going, but it was great. And then when the game was over and the Steelers won, my assignment was to get some of the Steelers players off to their interviews, which was super fun too. And they found it annoying. I was dragging Big Ben, and he is really big, and I was having to drag him, and he's like, "Stop pulling me, stop pulling me." I'm like, "No, ABC's waiting. We gotta get there." Yeah.
That's so funny. That's
Yeah.
kind of funny. It almost parallels because Eagles are my team. I worked for them my senior year of college. And I was also trying to pull Jordan Mailata.
Oh yeah.
Big
Yeah.
dude. He didn't want to come do an interview after the game. He was like, I just want to be with my wife, man. But
Yeah.
yeah, crazy experience. The magnitude of it is, again, talking about all your friends and family watching on the TV. I think sometimes when we're so in the ecosystem, it feels so normal to be like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
this is a work
Yeah.
event. Like this is a work trip. But
Mhm.
the 100 million people watching the game, this is like the event. This
Yeah.
is
Yeah.
it's just crazy.
Yeah. It's great. Yeah. You didn't ask me my least favorite, but I can tell you that one's easy. The
Oh, let's hear
Blackout.
it.
New Orleans.
Oh
The
man.
Blackout. That was awful, but we survived. We made it through.
How, if you don't mind me asking, how did that actually end up happening? I don't know if I know this story.
It was a power outage. I know people love
Mhm.
to blame Beyonce. I think they're blaming the wrong person. She
Not
did
the
put on a
life.
fantastic show, but I would not blame her for doing it. But yeah, it happened in the third quarter, and everything went dark, and I was up in NFL control. There was actually a 60 Minutes camera there, doing a behind the scenes on the guy who was then the head of events, and they kicked him out immediately. We were in this like, you know, two by this box up there, this artificial box. It looked like it was built of 2x4s, and the lights went out, everything went out, and we had no idea what was going on. We had no idea. And so, it was a little bit of chaos, like nothing was happening. The phones, electricity, everything was out. And then my phone rang, and I picked it up, and it was one of my kids were at home watching the Super Bowl, and one of my daughters was crying, Mom, are you okay? Are you okay? And I said, what are you watching on TV? And she said, are you okay? Are you okay? And I said, no, what are you watching on TV? She starts crying harder. And I said, damn it, tell me, what are you watching on television right now? And she turned around and said, okay, guys, she must be fine. She wants to know what's on TV, what's airing. And I heard somebody say commercial. And I'm like, no. And they said, we think she's fine. And I said, I got to go. I'll call you back later. I put my cell phone down, and just then, on the phone that they had installed for me, one light went on, one light on this phone. I hit the button. I didn't even know where it was going. It went downstairs to CVS to their sales truck.
Wow.
And their head of sales, Tony Toronto, was there. And I said, why are you running commercials? Why are you running? He goes, we're not running commercials. I told them not to. And I said, they're in commercials right now. So this whole like chain of events, we still joke about this all the time. It set off this chain of events where I was totally tuning out anything. We didn't know what was going on. Nobody knew. People were scared. But this
Yeah.
was my way of just, hey, just focus on the business, focus on the game, focus on what's happening. What are people seeing at home? They got to stay live. Don't run commercials because the advertisers are paying to be in the game. They're not paying good money to advertise during a blackout. And I knew that, and I didn't want them to be re-airing the commercials over and over. Like, so they air 2 or 3 commercial breaks, and then we have to air them again. We didn't want that to happen because then those advertisers would be asking CBS for their money back or make goods or whatever. So that I just kicked in. I kicked into like the business mode there, and I think that's what kept me from being nervous or scared that it was anything, parade of horribles. And we made it through, and that was the second scariest part of it. The most scary part of it was after everything resumed, we got the commercial, we reformatted the breaks and everything, the commercials aired. We get back to the hotel, and we went to the big party afterwards,
Mhm.
and somebody tapped me on the shoulder and they said, the commissioner wants to talk to you.
Oh.
Oh no.
So I went over and I sat at his table. He was there with his wife, Jane, and he was asking me, a lot of questions about what happened and why. And he knows so much about the game. He knows so much about what we do, all the details. And I appreciate that. And he asked me some tough questions. And I just said, these are the decisions that I made. These are why I made it. I couldn't get to Howard Katz was our boss then. I couldn't get to him. He was in a suite somewhere else or an operation. I couldn't call him. So I had to make my own decisions right then and there. And I told him the decisions. And in the end, he challenged me on a few, but in the end, he said, you know what? He said, good job. Did a great job. I agree with you. He said, I don't know if I would have made the same decisions, but I think you made the right ones. Thank you. And then
Wow.
and then Jane, his wife, just said, can you let her go now?
Take a deep breath.
Yeah, yeah. That was the scariest moment of the night, by the way. Yeah.
That's Insane. It's funny that you bring that one up too, because Maggie knows I'm from New Orleans, and my mom actually used to work for Entergy, which is the, I guess, main energy
Oh,
provider for the city, and one of
interesting.
the Saints and Superdome's energy providers. So not to throw her under the bus because she wasn't working for them at the time, but not Entergy's greatest moment in New Orleans.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it was not great. I mean, we learned a lot. Listen, that's what you have to do. We always say prepare for the worst and pray for the best or hope for the best. That's the best you can do. And we've always had some protocols in place for, if there's a game delay or suspension. And I learned that back when I was at ESPN, because you got all these networks, all these sports going with tennis and motorsports and everything else. There's always something going wrong. So we always had what we call conditions and guidelines. But this was totally unexpected. We didn't see that coming, but everybody had to react in the moment. And we learned a lot and came up with some new policies and protocols that we applied, the next year and every year thereafter.
I think it's interesting to the outsider perspective listening in. When I tell people kind of the work we do with commercial breaks and try to explain that to
Yeah.
them, a lot of people don't even understand. They think it's automated. And so my question to you is, what are some of these aspects of your job that when you explain them to non-sports people or people outside the industry that they're kind of shocked to hear about?
You mean like just the live games?
Yeah, like I
Or the
know Super Bowl, aren't you the one on the buzzer if there's like a curse word during the halftime show? That's like such a small role, but someone
Yeah.
has to do it.
Yeah, I had to do that when we decided to go to a delay and our network partners didn't want to do it. I was chosen to be along with somebody else in our legal team to be on the button. And I wanted nothing to do with it. I thought this is like, there's only downside. This is a career, this is a career killer, right? If something happens and you hit the button, good, you did your job. If you miss it, like it's curtains, right?
Yeah.
But what was interesting is that the 3 years that I did it, I had Bruce Springsteen, The Who, and then Tom Petty. So I kind of sort of lucked out on those. I was a little bit worried about staged audience and the girls dancing around in tube tops and such, but I made sure legal got waivers from all of them. So yeah, that's an interesting one. Well, listen, when the Super Bowl happens, what I tell people is the only thing that I haven't seen is the game. Before the Super Bowl, I've seen every commercial, every promo. I've seen all the features that the network's going to air. I've seen their graphics. I've seen all the production elements, the bumpers and teases. I've seen the halftime show because I go to rehearsals. And then we've also vetted the lyrics and the wardrobe and all of that ahead of time. But the crazy stuff, there was actually a crazy one this year. Kendrick Lamar decided late to change his hat several times, the hat that he wants to wear. And we, as a policy, we don't want free advertising for anyone, especially in any NFL game, especially the Super Bowl. So he had come up with a couple of hats that he wanted in the couple days prior. And I kept rejecting them, like, no, that's advertising, that's advertising. And we're literally up to like 4 o'clock on Super Bowl Sunday. And now he's got a new hat. And we were going back and forth with the whole team. And I just said, listen, and also Rock Nation and the woman who runs that for Jay-Z, she had asked me to do wardrobe checks, which I don't normally do. I'm usually up in control, but I said, okay, if that's what I have to do, fine. So I went down, I did wardrobe checks, which was interesting. I had to go around to all of the dancers. Everybody was in the halftime show. I did their wardrobe checks.
Wow.
And so I walked up to Kendrick's dressing room. And when I arrived, they all said, she's here for the hat. She's here for the hat. And they all turned around and they presented the hat to me. And it was the craziest thing. I'm looking at this hat and I said, okay, let me see the other side. They turned it around and I said, this is fine. This is not an issue. This is totally fine. They all started cheering. And of course, then I'm thinking, what did I just approve? Like, wait, did I miss something here? And then there was a camera too. This might show up in a documentary at some point. But then we went in the dressing room and he decided he was going to wear it backwards. And he was so sweet. He was so nice. He wanted to make sure everything was good and he wasn't, breaking any rules or anything. And so he told me he was going to wear it backwards. Was that okay? And I said, sure, it's totally fine. Both sides of the hat are okay. And he'd turn around and all that. But that was really funny because it all became a hat. It was all about the hat. What hat was he going to wear? Yeah.
What hat did he end up wearing? I can't even remember.
It just had some designs on it. He had like a brooch on one side and he had the number 5. It was 5 5, 5 plus 5.
Okay.
Huh.
So we had to do a little bit of research and find out what that meant.
I was gonna say, that's lost
That's
on me.
There are a
fun.
couple of other things. He has said in the press before that he's 5'5", so he has said 5 + 5, and it's in some lyrics, one of his songs. Somebody tried on his team tried to convince me it was about the 5 Grammys he had just won, and I said, "No, that was last Sunday, and these are in the lyrics in his song that he wrote a long time ago, so no."
I did my research. You're incorrect.
Yeah, yeah, sorry, I'm not buying that one. But it was great, yeah, the show was great. But those are the kinds of things that we have to think about, the wardrobe and the lyrics, are the lyrics okay? And then, of course, we've got a delay. Now there's what we call a double delay on every halftime show, just in case something happens.
How
Uh,
long is that if it's a double delay?
it's about 15 seconds on the
Okay.
delay between the network and between what we do. But
Wow.
yeah, there are a lot of interesting things that we do in our jobs I think nobody would expect.
Yeah.
That's
Sometimes I even struggle to explain what we do because it feels like a series of small things that come together as one full busy job, but
Yeah, yeah.
hard to give an overarching.
Yeah, it is.
truly, I think there's so many cool things once you get into the sports industry that you just hear or see that otherwise, as a fan consuming the game, you just don't know. Like when you're watching the Super Bowl, you have no clue to what extent the work behind the scenes leading up to the game, the people in the building and the people at the networks and
Yeah.
all of the other ancillary employees, workers, etc., do to prop it up, and it's incredible. So,
Yeah,
um,
every detail. I mean, you think about our TV agreements are like 150, 200 pages. It covers a lot of ground, a lot of ground.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But Kathy, one, you've spent so much time with us, so thank you so much for that. We have one last question for you, and um,
Uh-oh.
no, it's a fun one. It's a fun one. I think just to like give you your flowers, no pun on your last name, but you've truly paved the way for so many women in the industry, whether it be production or what you're doing now at the NFL. But just want to know from your perspective. I mean, do you think about your legacy at all? It's undoubtedly a great one, but just personally on that level.
Um, no, I've not thought about it that way, actually. That's the first time I've even thought about the word legacy attached to me or my name. Um, I do think about sometimes some of the great moments I've had and some of the great opportunities that I've had along the way. We talked about WNBA, just working on the NFL, some of the amazing people that I've met and interviewed along the way. I guess, maybe some of the things I would be most proud of would be, well, I mean, obviously my kids, we talked about my kids and the experience of my kids and just being a good parent, while I'm working. That's the most important thing. But I think also maybe it's the people that I've hired, the people I've mentored. Mike North in our department, sometimes jokes about my coaching tree. He goes, the Bill Walsh coaching tree. There are a lot of people in the business who I hired or who have worked for me along the way. And some of them have some pretty lofty titles. You've got like Burke Magnus, who's the president of content at ESPN. Yeah. David Burson, who's president at CBS, and then Julie Sobieski, who is one of the heads of programming. It's a pretty long list. I mean, listen, Charlotte she was a guest on your show.
Mhm.
I hired Charlotte at the NFL. And then also some of the work I've done in the areas of diversity. At ESPN, I was on a diversity committee there. I'm on a diversity committee at the NFL. This was like 10, 12 years ago, I think. I hired the first woman of color to work in the broadcasting department. She was an intern, but a season-long intern. And then a few years after that, hired the second one, who's with us right now. You guys know Quentin. He's still in our department. So those are, proud moments for me, bringing women. I've tried really hard, to introduce women into the broadcasting department as well, interns and temps and whatever I can do. And also just mentoring, anytime I can mentor. I never say no. If somebody comes to me and they want career advice or they want to be connected with somebody else, or and sometimes they just might come to me and say, listen, it's not working for me here for whatever reason. I love the NFL, I love the game, but this is not working. Can you help me find something else? And so I'm always, willing to help them and also kind of identify what they want to do. Sometimes people think they want to work in sports, but maybe they really don't. Or maybe they're the wrong sport, or maybe it's just the wrong area of the business. There's a lot of different areas. This kid came to me one time, a parent. sent him to me so he could work in ESPN in programming. And the more I started asking him questions, I realized he doesn't want to do this. This is not what he wants to do. And so I asked him, what do you want to do if you could do anything in the world tomorrow morning when you wake up, what would you do? And he was giving me some pretty lame answers. And I said, like, seriously, you got all the money in the world, you wake up tomorrow, what would you want to do? And he said, oh, I would go skiing for sure. I said, now we're on to something. And I said, do you realize all the careers you could have in skiing? You know, you could go work for a ski travel agency. You could work for USA Skiing. You could work at a ski resort. You could go work at a company that makes skis. Think about all the businesses. And then within those businesses, there's all the different disciplines, you know. So what are you good at? Are you a good cook? You can go be a chef, right? There's so many different things. So think about it that way. Find your passion. You know, somebody told me this a long time ago, make your avocation your vocation. And so I think that's really super important too, is to find that. I've said that to so many people and tried to help people find what it is they want to do, what area they want to do, what's going to make them happy, but also it's a kind of a math equation here, right? It needs to be, what do you love doing? What are you good at? And what does a company need? Like, how do you find that intersection of those? And that's what I try to do. So I think over time, anybody that I've helped to mentor or anybody they've hired along the way that's done really well, I think that's great. And then a lot of the work that I've done, like the TV agreements at the NFL and some of the things that I launched at ESPN, you know, I'm still very, very proud of those.
As you should be, honestly. It's incredible to hear about, even from this perspective now, just incredible to hear about the people that have come under you, that you've helped get to where they are. And then even for Maggie and myself, just to be able to like have this conversation, to have gotten the opportunity to work with you, alongside you, even if not for too long, but I mean, just incredible opportunities. And yeah, honestly, can't thank you enough for spending the time and just like the stories itself. I think
Yeah.
that's what
Oh
everybody's
yeah.
gonna love.
A lot of stories. I know. I know people keep telling me, my kids keep telling me, write them down. I
You
think I
need to
need
write a
to.
book.
Get a
This would
book.
be
Yeah.
I don't
great.
know about a book. I might write a book for my kids. I'm not sure. I'm not sure the story is that interesting. But, you know, listen, and back at you. I am so impressed with what you guys did, because one of the things that I always say to people is find an opportunity. You know, this is your job, but what's not being done? What can you do that's different? What's the big idea? And don't be afraid to share your ideas. Don't be afraid, you know, be an entrepreneur. And I think what you guys are doing is just amazing here. You know, you're really thinking outside the box. This is new, it's different. You're, you know, I'm sure you're having fun, which you said, and I think that that's the best part of it. But you're also helping to grow women's sports and inform others on all the amazing things there are about women's sports. So it's good for you. You guys are going to go very, very far in your careers, no question.
That is so kind. Thank you. That I'm really taking that in. Thank you very much. It's always awesome. Just, I don't know, you put the content out and you never really know who's going to listen to it. And again, sometimes it just feels like Josh and I having a conversation across the computer, but I'm glad it's translating well. So thank you for listening. And again,
Oh,
thank you for coming on. This was
no
phenomenal.
problem. No problem. You guys are doing great. You're doing great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Cathy.
Kathy.